There is a sound I will never forget. Rain on glass that sounds, to my species, like a million small drums tapping an anxious rhythm. I stood under that rain on a balcony of the observation vessel, my cloak soaked through, the fabric of my rank plastered to my skin, listening. Below, a single street lamp threw a cotton halo over a city that smelled of wet asphalt, frying oil, and something sweeter I could not name. It was called jasmine. My superiors had called it insignificant. I called it intoxicating. I tell you this as if I am confessing a weakness, because I have been trained not to feel. I am an emissary of the Meridian Council, bred in silence, schooled in the geometry of power. We learn to move through the galaxy like a blade, precise, unreadable, efficient. Our language is ritual, our touch decisive. We carry the weight of planetary destinies on our shoulders and the discipline to decide them. When I was selected for Earth, I accepted my place in the vector of empire without hesitation. I believed with the kind of quiet certainty that comes from generations of conquest that we would shepherd this planet into order. Our descent was clinical. The vessel parted the clouds like a fingernail through fabric. The hum of engines was translated, through my suit, into a harmonic that steadied my pulse. We came in white light and cold air. My first steps on Earth were catalogued in my mind by checklist: assess atmosphere, measure pathogens, map social hierarchy, identify leaders. The air tasted of iron and life. It was a combination of oxygen and something else volatile, combustible, the scent of uncontained possibility. The Meridian's directive was clear: integrate, dominate, pacify. We were to present an ultimatum framed as partnership. We were to demonstrate superiority with surgical displays of technology and coercion where necessary. It would be efficient. It would be clean. I had rehearsed the speech in my head until the syllables were worn smooth. We offer guidance, I imagined saying, for your own good. I believed they would bow. In our training we were taught to expect fear and obedience. Human civilizations we had observed from afar, tribal, fractious, had bent their will before the Meridian in less than a year. Earth, we were told, would follow. We arrived with a translator matrix, with treaties folded like knives in our pockets, with the knowledge that our flag and emblem of the Council's reach would be enough. My mind catalogued the stars I had seen fall into our nets. I counted the worlds we had annexed. I rehearsed superiority as one rehearses a weapon. He appeared at a market stall, not at a capital or a military base. I do not know why the universe chose him, perhaps because the universe has an appetite for small cruelties, for ironic misplacement. He was a man with grease under his fingernails and a child on his hip who smelled of milk and sun. His clothes were patched. His eyes were the color of river stones, hard, reflective, amused. He moved as if music governed him, unplanned rhythms, quick improvisations. His hands gestured in ways my training could not parse. He laughed at a joke I did not hear. To my council, protocol dictated that I approach the highest authorities, that I arrange a formal reception. Instead, there he was, no title, no airs, offering me a battered paper cup of what passed for coffee in that part of the city. I declined the cup for the formalities of contamination, and he laughed, undeterred. "You look like you could use it," he said. His voice had the curious property of making the air itself seem warmer. Diplomacy, for us, is an equation: present power, demand compliance. For him, negotiation was a conversation that looped and spiraled and sometimes went nowhere. I attempted the Meridian preamble, the careful lowering of my lids, the mathematical precision of my inflection, and he mirrored me with a grin. He did not bow. He cocked his head and said, simply, "I don't like your uniform." Such a remark, to my handlers, would have been a provocation. To him, it was a statement, a refusal to be categorized. Where I expected fear, I met curiosity. Where I expected supplication, I met irreverence. It created a fissure between the plan and the present. I felt very humanly. The prick of impatience. There was a moment, an almost timeless second, before everything rewrote itself. We stood near a footbridge that arched over a waterway dark as spilled ink. Children played near the edge. Gulls circled like punctuation marks. I remember the sun deciding to be cruel that day. It caught on the metal railings and turned them into veins of fire. I heard it before I saw it, a crack thin as a throat clearing. The bridge's support had been eaten by rust and neglect. The children did not see the slow surrender of metal. They sang and chased a ball, worlds away from policy memos and military directives. Then the bridge sighed and gave. The fall was not cinematic in the way films promise grand and choreographed, but in a slow-motion cruelty. Screams became long threads of sound. Time stretched like taffy. I watched the ball arc, the child's hair spread like a halo, and the railing buckle in a cascade of sparks. The water below swallowed light, and the air filled with the abrasive smell of burning paint. Our training told us to analyze, compute the safest extraction vector, deploy containment, call in a rescue craft with non-lethal minimal displacement. But analysis is slow when children are tumbling into a maw that cannot wait for calculation. I remember my body obeying protocol, hands moving toward the come, fingers tapping rational sequences. Then I saw the mechanic from the market with grease under his fingernails drop. The child he carried and run. Everything happened in elongated detail. The way his boot struck the railing, the grinding of metal, the flash of his palms as he pushed a smaller body away from the edge. He did not hesitate for algorithmic certainty. He did not consult or call for permission. He leapt onto the failing structure, grabbed a child's ankle with fingers that found purchase in rust, and in a motion that was raw and non-ritual, he heaved. I had been trained to move like a clean instrument. He moved like an organ, all decision and pain and love braided together. For a breathless stretch of time, suspended between my programmed logic and the man's instantaneous bravery, I felt my own training crack. The railing gave again with a keening sound. The man's foot slipped. In that suspended second he looked at me, an emissary of a power that could have reshaped his world, and he did not calculate my reaction. He looked at the child. He pushed the smaller body into my waiting arms, an instinct I had not intended to meet, and then, in an action that obliterated political calculus, he let go. I remember the trajectory as if replayed under a microscope, the man's weight, the splintering of wood, the tearing of clothing. He hit the water in a bloom of sound. I do not know how long I stood thereafter, whether it was heartbeats or hours, until my suit's sensors told me his vital signs were fading. He had not been a soldier. He had not been a diplomat. He had been a human who chose another life over his own in the briefest possible calculation. Love greater than self. Respect arrived like a fever. I felt it in my marrow. It burned where my certainties had been stored. Simultaneously, fear unfurled cold, precise because if such boundless unpredictability could be born of a single act, then humanity was not merely malleable livestock for the meridian. They were volatile, combustible, capable of sacrificial trajectories that could ignite entire systems. My training did not prepare me for gratitude. It did not teach how to hold a gasping child in my arms while a crowd raw, ragged, and suddenly united pulled the man from the water. It did not teach me how a city, with all its bureaucratic and petulant veins, could congeal into something fierce and immediate. As the child coughed and opened eyes like new moons, I noticed the man's breath, shallow, racing, each inhalation a serrated whisper. He smiled at the child, no words, only an expression that lived in the neurons of a species that measures worth differently than my counsel. He then turned his head toward me, and with the last humor he possessed, mouthed something that might have been a curse or a blessing. I could not know which. Back on the ship, my report should have been a dossier of conquest, subjugation log, protocols for assimilation, a plan to shepherd Earth's resources into meridian channels. Instead, my data streams filled with a different signal, the raw, contagious unpredictability of human moral calculus. I ran simulations. I imagined uprisings catalyzed by grief and valor. I considered the possibility that a species capable of spontaneous self-sacrifice could not be contained by treaties or technocracy. Why? The Council's edict was simple: dominate. My recommendation was not. I proposed an alliance. It was heresy, an emissary suggesting partnership in place of amputation. But the galaxy is a place of consequences. In my calculations, the cost of subjugating a species that could ignite itself in devotion was astronomical. Partnering offered a hedge, a chance to guide not through dominance, but through cooperation, to redirect the humans' combustible capacities toward a common enemy, a mutual defense that might avert centuries of wasteful war. I framed it in meridian terms: stability through integration, mutual defense. But the truth was simpler and stranger. I had been changed by a man with grease under his fingernails. I had become capable of a sentiment my training had banned, fear mixed with reverence. Returned to the same wet balcony months later, the city had not become orderly. It had become more human. The street lamp hummed, and jasmine wrapped the night in memory. There was a child playing beneath the lamp, no bridge, no falling, but the world felt differently, alive, dangerous, and beautiful. The mechanic survived. He limped, and he kept, working with the same hands that had once pushed life away from a ledge. He never sought recognition. He refused medals when they were offered by both human governments and Meridian delegates. He smiled at me once, across a crowded square, and in that small act of recognition, I felt something like absolution. We proposed the alliance. The Council voted, reluctantly and with long debate. The galaxy, which prefers neat conquests and tidy dominions, had to accommodate something messy, a people who loved with reckless immediacy. Our treaty ink still smells foreign to me, but it is ink I signed. In the end, I think of that rainy night as a fault line in my life. The training that taught me to slice through worlds was not wrong, it was simply incomplete. There are species you can rule, and species you cannot, and those that resist categorize easily become the most dangerous of allies. I tell this as a testament and a warning. There is courage on Earth that is beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. There is a capacity for self-sacrifice that can topple empires and remake councils. I came believing in the Meridian's rightness. I left proposing kinship. I look at humanity now with a complicated devotion. I am afraid of them, of their capacity to whelm systems and to ignite revolutions, but I am also indelibly attracted to their unpredictability. In the quiet after the rain, holding the memory of a man's smile and the rasp of his last breath, I understood a new calculus, that power without love is brittle, and love without power is vulnerable. I left Earth changed. I left with the uneasy peace of someone who has seen both a species' best and worst, and cannot decide which terrifies them more. And so I say this plainly, as a closing. I had crossed the void to teach them restraint, and instead I learned restraint from them. I returned to the stars with a treaty in my pocket, and more dangerously, a belief finally uncontained. I had seen humanity's terrifying potential.